The studio lights seemed to blaze with an unusual intensity that evening, stretching shadows across the stage that heightened the palpable sense of tension. In her seat, Rachel Maddo was the picture of trademark intensity, her research papers fanned out before her like a field marshal's battle plans. For her, this was no ordinary interview. She envisioned an iconic, career-defining takedown, the sort of explosive clip that anchors reputations and drives ratings for weeks on end. Leaning in, she adjusted her glasses, her eyes gleaming with focused anticipation. Across from her sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, a new star ascendant within the Democratic Party. At 43, Crockett possessed a quiet, formidable composure that instinctively commanded attention. A former trial lawyer and civil rights attorney now representing Texas, her reputation for bringing a fierce energy to every room preceded her. What many had yet to fully appreciate, however, was her innate talent for commandeering the spotlight and holding it with unyielding resolve. Maddo felt in control. She and her team had spent days preparing, even extending the airtime for this very purpose, to pin Crockett down on what they'd termed progressive overreach. The strategy was straightforward: demonstrate to the audience that while progressive ideals might resonate emotionally, they remained politically dangerous, a liability Democrats could ill afford with another election cycle on the horizon. This was Maddo's arena. She had orchestrated this dance countless times. Confident guests entered, and humbled guests departed. It was a rhythm she had perfected. Yet, Crockett's posture should have been the initial alarm. She didn't fidget nervously or retreat into her chair. She didn't clutch at papers or sip water for composure. Instead, she sat perfectly upright, serene, with the air of an attorney who had entered the courtroom already in possession of the winning evidence. Observers at home would later remark they sensed it too, a certain current suggesting Crockett hadn't come to merely defend. She had arrived ready for a full confrontation. The segment opened conventionally enough. Maddo welcomed her guest, offering a smile thin enough to veil the sharpness beneath, and launched her first volley. Her voice carried its signature, deliberate authority, designed to put guests immediately off balance. Congresswoman Crockett, she began, there's been considerable discussion about whether progressive Democrats are undermining the party's prospects in the coming elections. Polling indicates policies like Medicare for all or defunding the police fail to resonate with moderate voters. What is your response to Democrats who fear this rhetoric is simply handing victories to Republicans? It was a classic Maddo maneuver, framing the question within a premise that assumed a problematic answer, forcing the guest onto the defensive. Most politicians would have instinctively softened, pivoted, or evaded. Crockett merely smiled, a knowing, measured smile, and leaned forward. Rachel, she stated calmly, I find your framing of that question quite interesting. But before we discuss polling, perhaps we should examine actual results. Because the data I'm reviewing tells a completely different story. The rebuttal was subtle yet devastating. Rather than accepting the premise, Crockett dismantled its very foundation, shifting the entire dynamic of the exchange. One could almost detect Maddo's slight, surprised blink, the first indication that evening that the queen of liberal media had just been checked. Maddo pressed again, more pointedly. The rustle of papers under her fingers filled a brief pause. But Congresswoman, looking at races in states like Virginia and New Jersey, Democrats have faced serious struggles. Many analysts point directly to progressive messaging. Isn't it irresponsible to continue championing these positions when the data suggests they are costing us elections? The word irresponsible hung in the air, a deliberate challenge. Crockett didn't flinch. Her gaze sharpened, her voice adopting the precise edge of a litigator confronting a hostile witness. Rachel, she replied, tone still even but now layered with steel, I find it fascinating that you would lecture on responsibility when the evidence points elsewhere. In my Texas district, of all places, I won by championing Medicare for all, affordable housing, and criminal justice reform. And I didn't just win, I mobilized voters who had disengaged from politics entirely. That isn't irresponsibility. That is democracy in action. The silence that followed was electric. For a split second, Maddo's famed confidence faltered, her composure cracked just enough for the cameras to capture it. She was unaccustomed to a guest pushing back with such force so early. This wasn't a defensive play. This was a direct offensive strike. Behind the cameras, producers shifted uneasily. They had anticipated sparks, but controlled ones, with Maddo firmly in command. Instead, Crockett was rewriting the script entirely. Determined to regain control, Maddo doubled down. Her voice rose a fraction, aiming for authoritative finality as she brandished a page from her notes like evidence. Congresswoman, a victory in a carefully gerrymandered Texas district is fundamentally different from winning crucial swing states. Don't you believe it's reckless to advocate for policies that polling clearly shows are unpopular with suburban voters? Isn't the responsibility to help the party win, rather than just deliver speeches that sound compelling? There it was again, responsibility, now wielded like a blade meant to slice through Crockett's poise. Crockett simply leaned in further. "Rachel," she said, her pace deliberate, "let me pose a question to you. When was the last time you had to choose between paying for prescription drugs and making rent? When was the last time you decided between groceries and a medical bill?" The query landed like a thunderclap. Maddo froze for a half-beat too long. "I don't believe my personal circumstances are relevant here," she began, her earlier assurance notably diminished. "Oh, they are absolutely relevant," Crockett cut in, her voice rising with passionate intensity. "Because you sit in a multi-million-dollar studio, earning a fortune yourself, telling working families they should accept less. You're labeling the desire for healthcare as irresponsible, calling the need for a livable planet too radical. And frankly, Rachel, that reveals more about your perspective than it does about the voters you claim to understand." The atmosphere in the studio had transformed, charged with a raw, uncomfortable energy. Piece by piece, under Crockett's relentless pressure, Maddo's legendary dominance was eroding. And this was only the beginning. Maddo's expression hardened. She straightened her posture, a subtle adjustment veteran anchors use when they feel control slipping but wish to hide it. Yet, the flicker of disquiet had already been broadcast, and Crockett was just finding her stride. Maddo attempted to pivot, retreating to the safer terrain of data and analysis, her comfort zone. "Congresswoman, with all respect, I am not dismissing the hardships facing everyday Americans. But the political reality is that elections are decided by moderates and independents. They determine control of Congress and the White House. When the rhetoric becomes too extreme, it alienates them. That isn't merely opinion, that is political science." It was the kind of line Maddo's audience typically applauded, pragmatic, reasoned, positioning progressives as passionate but impractical. Tonight, however, Crockett refused the assigned role. She wasn't nodding politely or stumbling into defensive justifications. Her retort was swift, sharp, and utterly unwavering. "Rachel," she stated, "before Congress, I was a trial lawyer. In a courtroom, when evidence is presented, I don't simply accept it because it sounds convincing. I scrutinize its credibility. I examine the source. So when you cite political science, I must ask, whose science? Which polls? Because the data I review tells a different story. I see overwhelming support for raising the minimum wage. I see majority backing for universal healthcare. I see historic levels of demand from young people for climate action. This isn't fringe. It is the majority position in this country." Her words hung in the air, a direct challenge. Maddo pressed her lips together, shuffling papers as if seeking a rebuttal. But Crockett continued, her voice brimming with conviction. "And let's be clear, this middle you reference isn't some static, monolithic block frozen in suburban time. It is dynamic. It evolves. A decade ago, marriage equality was considered controversial. Today, it is mainstream. Why? Because people fought for it unapologetically. Because leaders refused to back down simply because a pollster declared it wasn't yet popular enough. That is how progress occurs, not by diluting the truth, but by stating it boldly and allowing the public to catch up. Viewers at home felt the shift instantly. Social media would soon erupt with clips of this moment, captioned "Jasmine Crockett delivers a masterclass on live TV and this is how you clap back with facts." Maddo's jaw tightened. She tried to steer the conversation forward, but the rhythm was irrevocably broken. For the first time, she appeared to be following, not leading. "Congresswoman," she said, her tone measured yet strained, "there's a distinction between inspiring rhetoric and winning elections. The hard truth is Republicans are laser-focused on acquiring power. While progressives speak of revolution, conservatives are methodically organizing, flipping school boards, state legislatures, and courts. Doesn't your approach risk handing them even more victories?" Crockett tilted her head, almost amused. "Are you suggesting Republicans prevail because Democrats are too bold?" "No, Rachel. They win because Democrats are too timid. While Republicans battle relentlessly for their vision, however extreme, too many Democrats are busy telling voters what they cannot have. That isn't strategy. It is surrender." The word landed with hammer force. Surrender. Maddo blinked, visibly thrown. Her entire program was built on dissecting Republican tactics. Now, a Democrat from her own ideological broadside was accusing the party of something worse, cowardice. "You label it boldness," Crockett continued, her passion rising. "I call it survival. People are drowning in medical debt. They work 3 jobs and still cannot afford rent. They watch their communities flood and burn due to climate chaos. And you wish for me to tell them to wait? To compromise? To accept half measures while billionaires and corporations draft the laws? That isn't moderation, Rachel. It is betrayal." For a heartbeat, the studio fell silent. Even Maddo, renowned for her swift pivots and sharp retorts, was frozen. Her lips parted as if to respond, but no sound emerged. The cameras captured it all, the rare sight of Rachel Maddo, speechless on her own broadcast. Crockett leaned closer, her voice lower now but no less potent. "You know what is truly irresponsible? Telling people their lives are negotiable. Treating their pain as a mere political calculation. That is not leadership. Leadership requires courage. If we lack the courage to fight for what is right, then what purpose do we even serve?" It was the kind of statement destined for endless replay, edited into clips across every social platform, set to dramatic music, analyzed in countless threads. This was more than a rebuttal, it was a philosophical declaration, a challenge to Maddo and the entire Democratic establishment alike. Maddo struggled to recover, but with each passing moment, she seemed more in pursuit of the conversation than in command of it. She reiterated points about pragmatism, incrementalism, and the perils of overreach. Each time, Crockett met her with incisive clarity, dismantling every argument and flipping it on its head. By the interview's midpoint, the power dynamic had conclusively shifted. Maddo, typically the conductor, now tapped the desk nervously, shuffling her papers with uncharacteristic agitation. Crockett, in contrast, seemed to gain strength with each exchange, her confidence radiating through the screen. Viewers witnessed it in real time. Hashtags trended before the segment concluded. #Crockett clapback, #Maddo moment, #Jasmine unleashed. Clips went viral, amassing millions of views before the final credits. What Maddo had envisioned as a controlled dissection had become a masterclass in political combat, one where she was no longer the instructor, but the student. Yet Crockett had a final point to deliver. She adjusted her microphone, allowed a deliberate pause to build suspense, then spoke with calm, devastating precision. "You know the core problem, Rachel? Too many Democrats seek applause for fighting without ever throwing a punch. They desire praise as defenders of democracy, yet when the moment arrives to actually defend it, they fold. They claim the voters aren't ready. The timing isn't right. We'll get there eventually. But here is the truth: people lack the luxury of waiting for politicians to discover their backbone. Maddo blinked, her fingers twitching over her notes. She had faced assertive guests before, but rarely one who seized control so completely. Crockett wasn't here to perform, she was here to transform. Let me offer an example, Crockett continued, her tone shifting to that of a storyteller, drawing viewers in. Last month, I met a single mother of 2 in my district. She works 60 hours a week at a grocery store. She is exhausted, strained, and lives in terror every time her children fall ill, because she has no health insurance. Do you believe she cares whether my policies are deemed too progressive? No. She cares whether her children live or die. That is the reality, Rachel. That is the urgency. It was raw, emotional, and impossible to dismiss. Maddo, who prided herself on intellectual rigor, now seemed adrift. The debate over ideology had become a moral reckoning, and Crockett was winning it with both logic and heart. Maddo sought firmer ground, leaning forward and lowering her voice as if to reclaim authority. Congresswoman, I don't question your sincerity or the urgency of these issues. But politics involves building coalitions. It requires compromise. If you push too forcefully, you risk alienating the very allies needed to pass any reforms. Isn't incremental progress preferable to none at all? It was a familiar argument, one Maddo had deployed countless times. Crockett's response, however, was instant, fierce, and unforgettable. Incremental progress, she shot back. Tell that to the family choosing between rent and insulin. Tell that to the community watching wildfires consume their homes. Tell that to the young adult buried under student debt before their first real job begins. Rachel, incrementalism is a luxury for those whose lives aren't on the line. For everyone else, it is a death sentence. And I refuse to look my constituents in the eye and tell them to wait their turn while billionaires purchase yachts with wealth extracted from their labor. The words cut through the studio like a blade. Maddo flinched, a minute reaction the cameras captured perfectly. The energy in the room had fundamentally altered. Producers behind the glass exchanged wide-eyed looks, they were witnessing broadcasting history. Crockett wasn't merely holding her own, she was redefining the rules of engagement. Then came the moment that sealed the encounter. Maddo, perhaps desperate to regain footing, reached for historical precedent. Congresswoman, consider the great movements in American politics, civil rights, women's suffrage, marriage equality. They all required patience. They didn't happen overnight. Isn't it naive to believe we can transform the system instantly? It was intended as a trump card, a conversation ender. Crockett was ready. Patience, she repeated, almost incredulous. Civil rights weren't achieved through patience. They were won through protest. Through disruption. Through people who risked everything because they could wait no longer. Dr. King did not write from a Birmingham jail cell urging, "Take your time, oppressors. We'll wait until you're comfortable with equality." He wrote that justice too long delayed is justice denied. You know this. Everyone knows this. Do not rewrite history to justify inaction. Maddo froze. The camera caught her eyes flickering, the look of someone realizing she'd stepped into a rhetorical trap. Crockett pressed on, her delivery surgical in its precision. Progress doesn't happen because politicians politely request crumbs, hoping the powerful feel generous. It happens when ordinary people demand what is rightfully theirs, and leaders possess the fortitude to stand with them, not lecture them about volume. So if my unapologetic stance seems naive in your view, so be it. I would rather be naive and fight for justice, than be cynical and settle for injustice. The audience at home responded not with audible applause, but in the rapid fire of tweets, posts, and shares. Hashtags exploded, #justice denied, #Crockett vs Maddo, #speak truth to power. In the studio, Rachel Maddo's composure fractured, if only for a second. She pursed her lips, drew a breath, and adjusted her glasses, a telltale sign she recognized the exchange was lost. Crockett, meanwhile, leaned forward once more, her gaze locked on Maddo's. "You asked if I fear alienating moderates. Let me tell you what I truly fear, alienating the people who place their faith in us. Those who continue to vote, to march, to fight, only to be told by their leaders that their dreams are unrealistic. That is what destroys movements, not boldness or passion, but betrayal by the very individuals claiming to represent them." The statement resonated like thunder. Maddo attempted to interject, but Crockett wasn't finished. "And consider this, the so-called moderates you're concerned about, they respect conviction. They may not agree with every position I hold, but they know I believe it deeply. People inherently trust authenticity more than polished talking points. That's why Republicans, however misguided, retain influence. They project conviction, even when their convictions are flawed. Imagine if Democrats projected that same strength, but with policies that genuinely uplift people. Imagine the coalition we could build." The studio lights now felt brighter, the tension thicker. This was no longer a simple interview. It was a battle for the soul of a party, a direct clash between establishment caution and insurgent courage. And in that moment, it was evident Crockett wasn't merely holding her ground, she was prevailing. Maddo inhaled slowly, searching for any thread to regain control. Her eyes darted to the teleprompter, but the pre-written notes felt suddenly irrelevant. She tried another angle, softening her voice to reframe herself as a concerned ally. "Congresswoman, I believe we share many priorities: healthcare, climate, education. But my concern, and that of many viewers tonight, is whether demanding everything at once risks achieving nothing. Do you not worry your approach could backfire and empower the very forces you oppose?" Crockett was not diverted. "No, Rachel," she stated firmly. "What risks empowering our opposition is fear. Fear of losing, fear of causing offense, fear of asking for too much. That fear has paralyzed this party for a generation. The consequence is a nation where billionaires wield more power than Congress, where corporations author legislation, and where ordinary people are left pleading for scraps. If we do not demand everything, we will receive nothing. That is the backfire we should fear." Maddo pressed her lips together, her silence acknowledging the sting of the words. Crockett pressed her advantage. "Think on it, Republicans never begin negotiations by asking for less. They demand the extreme, the outrageous, to drag the center toward them. Democrats, however, start by negotiating against ourselves. We say, here is the compromise we hope you'll accept. Then we wonder why the center continually shifts rightward. Rachel, that isn't pragmatism. It is surrender disguised as strategy." The audience could feel the fire in her words. Online, clips circulated at lightning speed. Maddo attempted another interjection. "But surely you acknowledge politics is the art of the possible. Isn't there a danger in setting expectations so high that people become disillusioned if change isn't immediate?" "Disillusioned?" Crockett repeated, shaking her head. "Rachel, people are already disillusioned. That's why voter turnout collapses. That's why faith in institutions is shattered. Do you believe lowering expectations inspires anyone? No. It drains them. It tells them their dreams aren't worth the fight. What inspires people is belief, a vision that tomorrow can truly differ from today. Movements are built not by managing disappointment, but by daring to hope." The words hung with profound weight. Maddo's face betrayed a flicker of recognition. She wasn't merely interviewing a guest, she was confronting a new political force that thrived on unapologetic truth. "You see, Rachel," Crockett continued, "the art of the possible doesn't mean accepting crumbs. It means expanding what is possible. Every major advancement in this nation, the end of slavery, the 8-hour workday, the Civil Rights Act, occurred because people refused to accept the limits imposed upon them. They were not possible until movements made them so. So when you urge me to be realistic, what I hear is, stay small. Stay quiet. Stay manageable. And I refuse. Maddo's jaw tightened. She straightened her papers, buying a moment, but the viewers saw it. She was on the defensive, and Crockett showed no sign of relenting. Briefly, Maddo tried to shift topics entirely. Let's discuss foreign policy, she began. Crockett interrupted with calm, surgical precision. No, Rachel. Let us finish this discussion. Because this isn't about policy minutiae. This is about political will. It is about courage. And the uncomfortable truth is that too many in power fear controversy more than they fear injustice. And that is precisely why we remain stagnant. The shift in control was undeniable. Maddo, one of television's most formidable interviews, was no longer leading. She was being led. Then Crockett delivered the line that would dominate headlines and highlight reels for days to come. You asked if I worry about alienating moderates. My answer is this: I worry about alienating history. When my grandchildren reflect on this moment, I do not want them to say, she had the chance to fight, and she chose to wait. I want them to say, she refused to wait. That is the legacy I pursue. Not approval. Not comfort. Justice. The statement landed with the force of a gavel, final, irrefutable. Maddo exhaled audibly, her attempt to mask frustration betrayed by the microphone. She adjusted her glasses once more, but the gesture now carried the weight of concession. Crockett sat back, her gaze steady, her posture relaxed, as if signaling she had nothing left to prove. The transformation was complete. Across America, viewers understood they had witnessed something rare in modern politics: authenticity triumphing over caution, conviction over calculation. Clips of the exchange tore across the internet. Headlines framed it as a generational clash, a definitive showdown between bold progressivism and establishment moderation. Supporters hailed it as a victory not just for Crockett, but for an entire movement. Critics of Maddo whispered that, for perhaps the first time in her career, she had been genuinely outmatched. The cameras continued rolling, but the battle was decisively over. Crockett had accomplished what few ever had: she had silenced Rachel Maddo. The tension in the studio remained electric. Producers behind the cameras exchanged uncertain glances, debating whether to cut to commercial. Maddo's team was accustomed to control, to carefully managed pacing and an anchor always ahead. Tonight, the script was in ashes. Rachel inhaled deeply, her voice now softer, almost resigned. Congresswoman, your passion is undeniable. But doesn't framing politics as a battle between the timid and the brave risk creating divisions within the very party you aim to strengthen? It was a final, pleading attempt to reclaim a fragment of authority. Crockett's eyes did not waver. She let the silence build, then delivered the answer that would echo long after the broadcast ended. Rachel, division does not arise from speaking truth. It arises from pretending the truth does not exist. It comes from silencing those in pain, from labeling their struggles too extreme to acknowledge. If that makes me divisive, so be it. I would rather divide the powerful than betray the powerless. The impact was profound. Maddo blinked, her arsenal of retorts empty. The weight of the moment pressed upon her, and the MSNBC titan suddenly appeared diminished beside her guest. Crockett leaned in, her tone dropping to a more intimate, powerful register. And let us be honest, Rachel. People aren't engaging with politics because they desire more spin, more caution, more promises of maybe next time. They are disengaging because they're exhausted by falsehoods. They crave raw, unpolished honesty. If the Democratic Party cannot provide that, others will. That is the real risk. Maddo sat motionless. The gravitas, the polished rhythm that defined her prime-time presence, it had vanished. In its place was a journalist visibly unsettled, grappling with a guest who had systematically deconstructed her framework before millions. The segment could have concluded there, already destined for the history books. But Crockett, sensing the magnitude of the platform, had a final declaration. She raised her chin slightly, her voice steady yet commanding. "You asked earlier if I fear alienating voters. Here is the truth. The only voters I fear alienating are those who have already given up on the system. They are not apathetic, they are exhausted. And when they see politicians dodging, hedging, and compromising away their futures, they don't see leaders. They see gatekeepers. I did not come to Washington to be a gatekeeper. I came to kick the damn gate open." The room fell utterly silent. Even the producers ceased all movement. Maddo's eyes widened, a mix of awe, shock, and disbelief. It was the kind of line that doesn't just conclude an interview, it defines an era. In living rooms nationwide, viewers leaned forward, feeling something they hadn't experienced from politics in years, genuine, unadulterated fire. When the program finally cut to commercial, Maddo leaned back in her chair, visibly shaken. She adjusted her glasses once more, not as a signal of confidence, but to mask her discomfort. Crockett, meanwhile, remained calm, collected, almost serene. She had said what she came to say, and she knew it had struck its mark. The aftermath was instant and viral. Hashtags trended across all platforms, #gatekeeper vs gateopener, #Crockett clapback, #Maddo moment. Twitter threads dissected each exchange. TikTok flooded with edits set to dramatic scores. On Clash Radar and beyond, commentators hailed it as a turning point. Headlines the next morning proclaimed, Rachel Maddo left speechless by Jasmine Crockett's fiery defense, the interview that shook cable news, a new progressive star emerges in viral showdown. Even critics conceded, Crockett had done what few dared. She had confronted Maddo on her own terrain and emerged not merely unscathed, but elevated. In political circles, the analysis began immediately. Some strategists called it reckless, others, brilliant. But no one could deny it. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett had cemented her status as a force that could not be ignored, a leader who refused to wait her turn. For Rachel Maddo, the evening would be remembered as that rare instance where she lost command. Not to a partisan foe, but to a rising Democrat embodying the very momentum her brand of caution had long sought to contain. History might record it as a shift, a passing of the torch, intentional or not. A moment when television's most powerful anchor met the unstoppable force of unapologetic conviction and faltered. The gate, as Crockett vowed, had been kicked open. And there would be no closing it again.